Hello everyone, and welcome to Capitol Watch for January 27th, our weekly look at legislative issues and how they impact public schools across Missouri. And as our special guest for this edition of Capitol Watch, we have the chairman of the Senate Education Committee, David Pierce of Warrensburg. And Senator Pierce joins us from our governmental relations offices in Jefferson City. And Senator, thanks a lot for being with us. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. I served on a school board for 9 years and was very involved in MSBA, so it's a great organization and it's a pleasure to be here.
All right, thanks again for being with us. Lots of issues to talk about, Senator, related to education, and of course, besides your position on the Senate Education Committee, you're also on the Senate Appropriations Committee, and so we wanted to talk about funding a little bit first. And the governor is proposing a slight increase in foundation formula funding and some flat funding for transportation and other programs. From your perspective, what does that look like? Are we going to be able to see that recommendation hold as far as the Senate is concerned?
Well, we'd certainly like for it to be more than it was. The governor recommended $5 million more, so we're going from $4 million now up to $9 million. And of course, that money is distributed through the foundation formula among the 522 school districts. I'm pretty confident that that money will at least be that much. The budget now goes to the House of Representatives. They'll be working on it. The bill will then go to the Senate, and so we'll be working on it. But I'm confident it'll at least be that much.
Mm-hmm. So that funding you are pretty optimistic about, even though other areas of state government, including higher education, are facing some cuts, aren't they?
Yes, I guess that was probably my biggest disappointment in the governor's budget was that higher education received a 12.5% cut. And for our four-year institutions, that's $89 million. For our two-year community colleges, a cut of $17 million. And so that's tough. And I know that, in fact, I have been visiting with the university presidents, board of governors, and talking about that. We hope to maybe cut that number down so the cut is not as drastic as what was proposed by the governor's budget.
Another issue, Senator, has to do with the foundation formula, and it's the so-called formula fix, because the formula continues to be underfunded from the projections of where it would have been had we not had the revenue shortfall that we're experiencing. And you have a bill on that. Tell us about that.
The formula works very well when it's fully funded. However, right now it is not fully funded. And so what happens when there's not a fully funding of the formula, our hold harmless districts will actually do better than our traditionally formula districts. There's about a 2-to-1 ratio as far as formula districts outnumber hold harmless districts 2-to-1. And so by not being fully funded when it's fully phased in on 2013, we will have a wild swing in funding with more money going to our formula districts. So what we're trying to do is to somewhat take those wild swings away, so it'll be more of a constant funding for both formula as well as hold harmless districts.
And your bill, Senator, includes what's known as a proration factor, isn't that right?
It is. It's a proration factor that if the formula is underfunded, then the hold harmless districts would only be cut half as much as the formula districts. Yeah. Representative Mike Thompson has a similar bill, and his bill would be that the hold harmless districts are cut at a third of what formula districts would be. And so both of those issues are on the table, a lot of discussion, and we'll be working on that probably the next few months here in Jefferson City.
An issue that received quite a bit of attention this past week, Senator, had to do with charter schools, and some hearings held on that issue and the possible expansion of charter schools beyond St. Louis City and Kansas City where they are now. What's your view on that issue?
Charter schools, I think, can play a very vital role in public education. Of course, right now it's just limited to Kansas City and St. Louis. And there has been a bill filed in both the House and the Senate dealing with the expansion of charter schools, which I think if there's going to be an expansion, we need to be careful. We just don't need to open the doors wide open. And my thought is to just limit it to local school boards would have the authority to be involved in the expansion and oversee charter schools. Another thing about charter schools, the results have been mixed. Some are doing a great job and others are not doing a good job. And those that aren't doing a good job, those need to be exposed. And if we need to pull the plug, we need to be able to do that much quicker as well. So there needs to be more accountability, more transparencies with our charter schools. And so to me, it's you got to have both. you got to have accountability, but then we have to have some kind of limited expansion of charters if we are going to expand it.
Another issue that is receiving quite a bit of attention has to do with the ability of students to transfer from unaccredited school districts to neighboring school districts. And we've had some court cases on that issue, and now it's also before the legislature. Tell us about that and what your views are on how to handle that situation.
Another big issue that we're dealing with in the legislature, it deals with school districts that are unaccredited. And that's been the case in St. Louis, and that's why the Clayton versus Turner lawsuit was filed. Turner versus Clayton, rather, lawsuit was filed. And that basically says that if you're living in an unaccredited district, then you do have the ability to go to a neighboring district, and that unaccredited district must pay for your tuition to do that. Heretofore, the surrounding districts have said no, they won't accept those students because they don't have the resources, or it would be an adverse financial effect on those surrounding districts, which I agree with. But it's really come to the forefront because Kansas City is now facing unaccreditation. And so Kansas City, so our two major metropolitan areas are facing that issue. And then what to do with those students that reside in the unaccredited districts. Kansas City geographically is a much larger problem because in St. Louis City is surrounded by St. Louis County, so that's the furthest students can transfer out. Whereas in Kansas City, it's 5 counties. And so you could have students going from Kansas City out to 5 different counties surrounding Kansas City, much larger geographical issue.
Mm-hmm. And so, Senator, would you support some reasonable limitations on the ability of the students from the unaccredited districts to transfer to the neighboring districts?
Well, I always support something reasonable, Brent.
So, in this case, would you support those, some limitations on that?
Well, I have filed a bill, and I know Representative Rick Stream has filed a bill that would limit the students in the unaccredited districts transferring out, that they have to currently be enrolled in the public schools. They could not be in a private or parochial school, and they must also try to exhaust all their possibilities as far as trying to attend magnet and charter schools as well. And so I think that would be somewhat of a limiting factor. Senator Victor Callahan has Senate Bill 581, which I think is a very interesting concept as far as some of the neighboring school districts are coming up with a plan to provide and to actually contract for services inside the Kansas City School District, but yet they would be in charge of those educational services.
Another issue that relates to the Kansas City situation, Senator, has to do with some legislation that would allow the state to intervene in unaccredited districts a little quicker than they're able to do right now. Right now there's a 2-year period before the state can intervene in those unaccredited situations. What's your view on that?
Well, Representative Mike Lair from Chillicothe has a bill that I think has been heard in committee. I'm going to have a bill similar to that in the Senate, so I obviously am supportive of that. 2 years appears to be a long time, especially when Kansas City, the concept of them being unaccredited happened in September. So this year doesn't even qualify for part of that 2 years. So it'd actually be 2 years from 2012. So it'd be really 3 school years that they would be in that somewhat grace period. That's too long. And so I favor compressing that and letting DESE decide and make those determinations.
Mm-hmm. Another issue I'd like to ask you about, Senator, has to do with a bill that would require school districts to get involved in determining the immigration status of kids as they come to school districts. And I know that's not a bill in your committee, but what's your view on that?
I'll be honest, I haven't really looked at that, and I haven't had much feedback from my constituents. So, and I don't know that much about the bill, so I really can't comment on it.
Okay. Also, Senator, over on the House side, there's been some talk about bundling these various issues that we've been talking about here in our program, perhaps into one bill or grouping them together in some way. Would you favor that approach or tackling these issues separately?
Not at all. To me, I think we have a lot of separate, distinct, big issues. And I think the longer we can keep them separate and vote on them one at a time, that's the way we should do it. I think some people want to put them together as somewhat of a political pressure to try to say, take it or leave it. And I don't think that's a good idea. So I will resist that temptation of putting them all together. Around Jefferson City, sometimes we call it a Christmas tree bill, where you just keep putting something else on the Christmas tree and the Christmas tree, and then it gets so big, it basically just kills itself under the weight of the bill. And so I'm afraid that that's what would happen. So I think just keep them separate, and we got plenty of things to talk about individually.
Obviously, Senator, a lot of issues related to education this session, as there always seems to be. And could you talk a little bit about the importance of school board members and administrators keeping in contact with you and other legislators on these issues and conveying their thoughts on what's best for public education?
Well, MSBA does as good as anybody as far as grassroots and letting folks back home know what's going on. And then we actually hear from folks back home, whether it's school board members, administrators. That's how I do my job. I mean, I can't gaze into a crystal ball. I can't read minds. I don't know what people are thinking unless they let me know. Generally, school board members and superintendents aren't bashful. And so we hear from them, but we need to keep hearing. Even if you know your representative or senator agrees with you, we still need to hear from you, because that makes it powerful when we get in committees or on the floor that we can say, my superintendent, my school board members, my teachers are behind this concept. And so let's keep hearing from you. Write, come to Jefferson City, email. You've got some great lobbyists here in Jefferson City, but they're only as strong as the folks back home who support them as well.
Senator David Pierce, thank you so much for being with us on our program. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Pleasure working with you.
And thank you for joining us on this edition of MSBA's Capitol Watch. Of course, we will be keeping you informed on what's going on in Jefferson City through our weekly Legislative Voice electronic newsletter, our daily blog on our website, and of course this program. A new edition is posted every Friday morning. Thanks again for watching, and join us again next week for another edition of MSBA's Capitol Watch.